Joining us right now here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, Bryan Toporek, writes for Forbes Sports, also co-host of the NBA podcast to get more into Game 6 of the NBA Finals tonight. You can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Coverage begins at 8 p.m. Also, some Sixers stuff as well. Bryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited the NBA Finals are on tonight. I've been looking forward to this game. But my big question with the NBA Finals to start with, Bryan, is there really a reality where what they expect to be 65,000 people combined between indoors and outdoors of this arena that the Suns can actually be a Phoenix and win a game tonight?
I think it's possible. I mean, these games, the last two games have been close, right? It's not the Bucks blew them out in Game 3, but the last two games came down to the final minute. Now, of course, the Bucks are going to have a very passionate crowd on their side, and I think it's fair to expect they're going to come out with a lot of energy. And how Phoenix handles those first few minutes, I think, will go a long way toward telling us whether they have a shot in this game. But I think there's, I don't think the series is over necessarily. Like I would be inclined to pick the Bucks tonight, but if the Suns win, I won't be totally surprised.
I know a lot of the people who are giving out gambling advice are saying the key to this series, tonight at least, is just take the Suns and the spread, because no one's really confident who's going to win the game, but everyone seems to be confident that they'll cover the +5. I think it's a very interesting observation because, as you said, it's been a close series, but not every game has been within 5 points. Those are two different things. You could have a close game, it'd be a 9-point difference, right? But it doesn't have to be within 5. So, how close can this game be, considering the fact that there's a part of me that wonders the Suns should have and could have won Game 5. They had the lead at the first quarter. They were owning the game, and they just let it all slip away.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say look at the Sixers, right? The same thing happened with them where they blew two huge leads in Games 4 and 5. They're going to Atlanta for Game 6. A lot of us probably wrote them off, and then they come and win a close game. I think it was a 4-point win, if memory serves correctly. So again, I think there's a world where the Suns could win this game. Is it likely? No, I think the Bucks should be favored, and rightfully so, but I'm not ruling out the Suns here.
Now, if the Suns do win tonight, then what has happened, or what did happen?
Yeah, I mean, my first guess is Chris Paul finally figured out some way to escape Drew Holiday prison. I think, ultimately, Devin Booker has been great in this series, especially the last two games. He had back-to-back 40-point nights. But that's partially by design from the Bucks as well. They're willing to live with Devin Booker's individual shot making if Drew Holiday can shut down Chris Paul as a playmaker. If he can get, because of that, it's not going to get these other guys involved, the supporting cast like Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, even DeAndre Ayton. So the Suns are gonna need more from people not named Devin Booker. But it's tough because Drew has been so effective defensively against Chris Paul. So can you get Devin Booker going not only as a shot maker, but also as a creator for others? If we get, again, these games have been so close. It's like if you get 2 more threes from Mikal Bridges or 2 more threes from Jay Crowder, even guys off the bench, Cameron Payne, Cameron Johnson, it's very thin margins that we're discussing here. So if you can get a little bit more from the non-Booker supporting cast, that might be enough to swing this series and go back to a Game 7.
Bryan Toporek joins us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. NBA Finals Game 6 tonight. Hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow Bryan on Twitter at @BToporek on Twitter. Don't forget to check out the NBA podcast, as well as all of his work over at Forbes Sports. Now, Bryan, I know there are some people who want the series to end tonight because I think there are people in USA basketball who would love to see those guys heading over to Japan and not playing any more games. So if the series does end tonight, what is the narrative moving forward for both of these teams?
Yeah, well, I mean, for the Bucks, this is just validation of really everything they've done, not only this season, but over the past couple years, it's overcoming the adversity of these early season or the early playoff exits that they've had for the past 2 years. It's, validation of the Drew Holiday trade, of signing Bobby Portis, signing Bryn Forbes, who hasn't been a big factor in the finals, but, especially against Miami, was very effective. So Milwaukee's riding high. Giannis, it's validation for him signing that Supermax contract. And I think we're going to start to have some real conversations about where Giannis ranks all time. Because if you look at what he will have accomplished by the age of 26, our mutual friend Josh Eberle tweeted this earlier. The only other player to do what he would do if they win tonight is Michael Jordan. So, that's, I think, a conversation that we can have, in the coming days, potentially. For the Suns, it's all on Chris Paul. He has this $44.2 million player option that, at this point, it sounds like he's expected to decline. So can the Suns re-sign him? I think they want to. I think even though he's struggled throughout some of this finals, getting to the finals for a Suns team that hadn't even made the playoffs for the past 10 years, they're going to want to keep Chris Paul. What price do you do that? Because you're going to have other teams that see Chris Paul and see what he did to the Suns team. The Knicks in particular, who are sitting out there with $50 million in cap space, they're going to say, oh, if the Suns don't want to pay up for Chris Paul, we're more than willing to. Maybe he can have that same kind of impact here. So how they manage that, I think, will be the biggest question, not only, for them this offseason, but it's one of the overall biggest questions for the NBA in free agency.
With that all being said, though, Brian, I got to say, though, if you're Chris Paul, you've only been in the NBA Finals with one team. Mm. You've gotten this close with only one other team. And you've been on a total of, 5 teams in your career? 5, 6 teams? So if I'm Chris Paul, what reason do I have to go shopping elsewhere? I go to the Suns to be like, you know what? I'm staying here. If I got to take maybe $5 million less per year for 3 years, go sign somebody else. Go get more players. Let's run this back. I can't wrap my head around the idea that Chris Paul is just going to be like, hey, Phoenix, it was fun. I'm going to go find a new team now.
No, I'm right with you. And I think that's, Chris Paul has made enough money throughout his career as well, where this isn't his first big contract, right? He's right. Coming off of a massive contract already. So if he ends up having to take a little bit less money to stay with Phoenix, it would be the smart play, honestly. As you said, it could give them more breathing room. I don't think they'll be under the salary cap either way, but maybe more breathing room under the luxury tax. And maybe that gives them a bigger mid-level exception that they can get, have an extra $4 million to play with in free agency. So, I think if the Suns came and said, we're going to offer you 3 years, $45 million, and the Knicks say, we're going to offer you 3 years, $100 million, that's where it might start to get a little sticky. But I don't think the Suns are going to do that because they've seen how important Chris Paul has been to what they did this year. Throughout the playoffs, DeAndre Ayton in particular has just been saying Chris Paul is the best thing that has ever happened in my career. And speaking of DeAndre Ayton, he's also up for an extension this summer. So, the Suns have to weigh, do we want to give this guy the max extension, which I think they would, if we don't have Chris Paul, who has helped unlock this level of effectiveness from him.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN at B Toporek on Twitter. He is the co-host of the NBA podcast, also NBA contributor for Forbes Sports. Now, you mentioned max contracts, which leads me back to the 76ers because the more I'm moving forward, Brian, it feels like Sixer fans are drawing battle lines. You have one group who are get rid of Ben Simmons. I almost don't care what you get for him. Then you have another camp who are listen, Ben's not the only reason why we lost these playoffs. Other guys lost, and the guy you trade is Tobias Harris. And they're just screaming at each other on social media. They're yelling at each other everywhere on the virtual verse. And I want to present the question to you. Who is the guy who should be traded or could be traded or makes more sense to trade? Harris or Simmons, and why?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clearly Simmons. To Tobias Harris has not popped up in trade rumors as much as like the Sixers are clearly shopping Ben Simmons. Shams Charania of The Athletic, Mark Stein of Substack have both reported that. So that's the more likely outcome of the two. And it makes sense, right? I mean, Tobias Harris struggled in those last couple of games of the playoffs, but he was very steady over the full Washington series, the first 4 games of the Atlanta series as well. It's not like if they trade Tobias and bring Ben back, they're still going to have the same problems that they had with Ben in the playoffs next year. If you trade Ben and keep Tobias, trade Ben hopefully for a primary playmaker, like Tobias wasn't the main problem in the playoffs. Ben's offense, not only in this playoff run, but in 2018, 2019 as well. So I think if we're talking which guy is more likely to be traded, it's Ben. I've kind of carved out a third camp, I guess, where I'm saying I don't know that the Sixers are definitely going to trade Ben Simmons this offseason. They're certainly shopping him, which is the smart play. He's not untouchable by any means. But especially given what's going on in Portland with Damian Lillard right now, where it looks like he basically did everything but request a trade last week. If I'm Daryl Morey, I'm saying, this CJ McCollum, Ben Simmons swap that's been discussed basically on every single website, I'm not trying to help Portland get better because my target is Damian Lillard. So if I do this Ben CJ swap and the Blazers benefit from it, the Dame's not going to want to come out, and we're not going to have the chip to trade for Damian Lillard. So I'm waiting that out. I'm trying to see what happens. Can the Blazers make the changes this offseason that they need to make Dame happy? Or do you go into the start of next season, they get off to a rough start, and the sort of trade request becomes an actual trade request?
Interesting, because number one, that's a very interesting angle to say Morey would hold out for said player instead of making trade. It's a whole other aspect of it. I do think I disagree with you a little bit on one thing, and that is, to me, I took away from the Lillard presser, whatever you want to call it, was, listen, don't believe anybody but me when it comes to what's going on with me. And in saying that, I want to be in Portland, but I'm going to play Russell Wilson, and I'm going to tell you that if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to ask for out of here. And I got to imagine when he sat down with, who's the GM? Neil O'Shea is his name, and the new head coach, Chauncey Billups, before he flew out to Japan, I got to believe. And we didn't hear anything about it, so that means nothing bad happened, right?
Yeah, right.
If something wacky happened, we would have heard about it the next day from somebody reputable, okay? Not some guy with 4,000 Twitter followers who covers the Washington Wizards who nobody's ever heard of before. But anyway, I got to believe that Portland is going to do what it takes to keep him, because I think they realize that this organization, Brian, they're in a really bad predicament right now because and I think if they look around the league, they look at the Milwaukee Bucks, they're going to try to do what they did. I don't know how they do it, but I got to believe they're going to try to be the Milwaukee Bucks next year. So that's why, to me, I don't know, is Morey going to be holding out for something that might never happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing he has to balance. But if Dame doesn't become available, we still have Bradley Beal, who could be a free agent next year, Zach LaVine, who could be a free agent next year. And if the NBA has taught us anything, it's that there's always a disgruntled star just lurking around the corner. So if it's not one of those three guys, who knows who's going to come out, But I think to the point about the Blazers and Dame and how they approach this offseason, I think the Blazers need to have a very honest conversation with themselves and look at their roster right now and say, what can we do to get on the level of the Lakers and the Bucks and the Suns and the Nets? And is there a way that we can do that? Because honestly, if you look at that roster, I don't think there is, barring, some sort of like CJ McCollum for Paul George and a bunch of, Luke Kennard, like just a total heist of a trade. I don't see a way where they're going to be able to upgrade to the extent that they're going to need to become a championship contender, which is what Dame says he wants. And they don't have a ton of young guys to build around. It's Anthony Simons, who's heading into the last year of his deal, Nasir Little, who hasn't done a ton in his first two seasons, And they're at a point now where Robert Covington's heading into the last year of his contract. Yusuf Nurkic is heading into the last year of his contract. Derek Jones is probably going to pick up his player option. He's only signed for one more year. So they could do a hard reset right now. Like if they want to choose that path, this offseason is the time to do it so you can flip these other veterans for assets as well. Because otherwise you run into a problem next summer where all of those guys are going to be free agents. You're probably not going to be able to retain all of them. And you also have Norman Powell, who's becoming a free agent this summer. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to sign Norman Powell to 20 plus million annually for 3 or 4 years if I think Damian Lillard's going to ask out in a year? Do we think that sort of contract for Norman Powell will maintain trade value? So I don't think the Blazers are going to reach that point, but I think there's at least an argument they should consider it, because waiting and trying to rearrange chairs on the Titanic, great, but you're probably not going to upgrade to the extent you need to, and then you're going to lose a ton more value next summer.
Now, with all that being said, back to the Sixers, is there incentive at all for Daryl Morey to move on from Simmons this summer? Like, I think most people believe Simmons should be gone. I'm in the camp that I believe Simmons will be gone because, as I've said, you don't think about the divorce and then not get divorced kind of thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I believe at some point Simmons is gone. But my question is there incentive for Morey to get it done before next season? Or is there more incentive for him to wait after the start of next season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really depends on what happens over these next couple of weeks with Dame, Beal, Levine in particular. And the incentive for him to do it this offseason is so you can go into next season, next training camp, knowing what, the overall makeup is of your rosters. Resolve giant question hanging over your team. The reason to wait, as I say, is the players who are probably going to be available this summer might not be the best players available over the next 12 months. So, do you risk making a trade now and taking a package that 3 or 4 months from now you realize, oh crap, that isn't the best we could have gotten?
Yeah, it's one of those deals where I don't know if there's a definitive answer for it, Bryan, but I think that, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it plays out either way. Bryan, before I let you go, I want to ask you one more thing. Big picture with the NBA. I know the league wants to get back to their normal schedule, right? The league is very intent on getting back to business as usual. And I know people are trying to point to a lot of different things and say different perspectives, but overall, do you think the league accomplished what it needed to with this season financially?
Yeah, I mean, I think this probably went better than they could have expected. I mean, it sounds strange to say considering a lot of the COVID issues that popped up, especially early in the season, but they got the 72-game season done. They got the play-in tournament. They got a full playoffs. I think where we were in December and January as a country was harder to project where we would be in May, June, July. And I think the situation was a lot rosier than anyone would have realistically expected, which certainly helped. When they started, before they even agreed to start this season, they agreed to changes for how, salary caps will be negotiated in future years. So it's going to increase by a minimum of 3%, a maximum of 10%. They're not going to tie it directly to revenue like they have in years past, because they know even with a 72-game season, like we lopped off 10 games here. So that's just a lot of revenue we lost. But I think realistically, this probably went as good, if not better, than the NBA could have hoped financially. I would guess we're still only going to get the minimum 3% increase of salary cap next year, but I'm definitely curious what happens the following year. And usually they tend to give updated guidance to teams for like the 2 or 3 year outlook before every offseason. So that's something to keep an eye on in these next few weeks as well, whether it's supposed to be like 115.4 million or something like that. the following year. So, if that increases and how that changes teams' approach to this offseason as well.
He's Bryan Toporek. Give him a follow on Twitter at @BToporek. Check out the NBA podcast. Like, subscribe, all the podcasting platforms. Also his work over at Forbes Sports covering the NBA. And as all guests, he joined us on the video stream. We were able to see him on the show. Bryan, appreciate the time as always. Enjoy Game 6 tonight.
Thanks, Josh. Let's catch up soon.